Hello my friends and welcome. Let's go straight to the front line, and later on I also gonna speak about so-called peace plan of Witkoff and Dmitriev. But the situation on the front lines, that is what physically and actually matters. For example, in Siversk, a Russian army was spotted inside the town. We have geolocation and confirmation of the Russian soldiers who already crossed those railways to get into Siversk, and it's not a good situation for that flank of Ukrainian army defense. So here is the Russian infiltration attempt into the Siversk, and the bad thing that they bypassed Ukrainian defense. As you might see, there are some of the trenches on this map. Russians found a weak spot where the trenches were not occupied by Ukrainian army. They just sneaked inside and they will continue same attempts. It means that this defense and this one, it doesn't matter that much. The other maps show something like this. This is the Russian map, and definitely Russians crossed this railway, so maybe they occupied more territories of Siversk in its southern part. Well, here is something mixed on the Michael 73 map update, but the situation is not that good. Here you can see this defense line goes here, and it was in the southern area somewhere too. So why the Siversk is so important? Because if Russians occupy it, pretty much there is a free way for them to reach Kramatorsk and maybe even Sloviansk. The next defense line is over here, goes alongside this road E40, which is one of the main supply connections for Ukraine. For Sloviansk, for Kramatorsk, so we see the attempt of the Russian army after occupation of Siversk, and they already penetrated Ukrainian defense lines out there. They basically want to strike Sloviansk next and Kramatorsk also. Actually, they're looking for multiple of the points advancing from the south, and the fights are ongoing in Konstantinovka itself already. They're also looking to go to Zoloty Kolodets, the area where they broke through in August, but they still have those attempts, and we see how they burn their vehicles, continue to burn those, yes. For them, this direction is crucial because it all goes for this defense line of Ukraine. So potentially there could be three of the vectors, 1, 2, and 3. Towards, not potentially, but it's already ongoing like that. Russia is advancing from three of the sides. They also want to occupy Liman. Liman is over here, but because the bridges were cut and there is the big river, Russians are unable to cross it any longer with any sort of the vehicles. So three directions, 1 to 3, which is pretty much enough for Russians in the future perspective to occupy this territory. But again, they'll have to waste tens of thousands of their lives for that one. That's why Russia is so focused to force Ukraine to give those territories to Russia. They say, Ukraine will lose those anyways. Yes, there is a possible scenario for that as well. But for Ukraine, the tactics is just to exhaust Russia as itself, Russian economy, and also Russian army, to finally force the Russian regime to collapse. Ukrainian war should be like Afghanistan war for the Soviet Union, which was the main factor for Soviet Union collapse. So Russians understand that it's the most defended area and they'll have to fight for it, maybe even for years and years, 2 years, 3 years. But that's the time that Ukraine may win. And I do not believe that the war with Russia could be over just like that if Ukraine gives up those territories without any sort of the guarantees. And even with guarantees, like any sort of the paper where Russia puts its signature, worth absolutely nothing. We already know it from Budapest Memorandum and from multiple of the agreements which were signed by Ukraine and Russia, where Russia recognized entire Ukrainian territory together with Crimea. Putin personally said multiple of the times that Crimea belongs to Ukraine in early 2000s, but now Russia occupies everything. Again, here we are partially touching the topic of some sort of the peace negotiations that are basically presented as capitulation of Ukraine. By recent news, you may read those. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. So it's just nothing. Ukraine will never ever agree on that variant, of course. Despite all of those issues on the front lines, yes, Ukraine is now losing the ground, and my task here as an independent journalist is to tell you what is happening on the front lines. Unfortunately for today, we have not so many good news, or I would say the news are just the Russian advancements, but we need to find out what is the perspective for Ukrainian army to defend itself, or long-term defense, whether it's possible or not. My opinion that it is possible. Now Russia takes the ground, but they will not occupy entire Ukraine in a matter of 1 year or something. But they propel, for example, in Zaporizhia direction. You may see this move towards Zatisha, and it was the last village on the way to Gulaya-Pole. Gulaya-Pole is the big hub center, or at least it used to be for Ukrainian even army command of the local region. Well, I guess not any longer. Russians will try to collapse this pocket. There are two of the villages, Vysoke and Zeleny High. Well, let me go to the Google Earth. We have just a standard map because it's more optimal, to use on PC than the Institute for the Study of War. And they put different strange marks there, so this map is way better. Gray area also expanded to Zatisha village. It means that Russians already crossed this river, mainly, at least with infantry forces. But for them to get to Gulaya-Pole, they need also to cross one more river of Haichur. The main cross point is this bridge, but there is also this one, two bridges. And here, well, maybe you can cross it here just with infantry forces. I see that it's some sort of the crossing. But the river itself, well, sometimes it's wide, sometimes it's not that wide. So Russians potentially, also one more crossing with infantry is possible here. Well, if Russians really want, they may find some of the areas to cross this river. After all, it's not that wide, especially over here. But for Ukraine, it's gonna be easier to defend Gulaya-Pole because of this water obstacle. Well, at least our drone operators will have just one line to monitor and target Russians then in their attempts to cross it. Here, the downside that Russians may advance from two of the sides if they occupy Zeleny High, that is the smaller village, just two of the streets, and the bigger village of Vysoke. They may also use the field roads to go from the eastern direction and also from the northeastern direction. Also, Russians may expand this pocket towards the village of Zelena, Varvarivka, but again, there is the natural obstacle river that goes simultaneously with the main Ukrainian defense line. So the outcome of this battle in this entire region depends on whether Russians are capable to penetrate this defense line and land on the other shore of the river with their substantial forces. As you might see, Ukraine also tries to stop Russians hitting their logistic centers just on the road. I think it was 3 days ago then this road was hit, collapsed, but Russians still may bypass it using field roads. So of course it will slow down their logistics, but not too much. In the northern area, everything stays the same. Russians went to High Village and also Danilivka. From those, they do not move, or there was no movement since a couple of days ago. I see that they mostly want to push towards Gulaya-Pole. It's understandable because it's the biggest settlement, the main crossroad, and here is the good chance for them to cross the river, after all. The deep state also gives us that update of the Russian advancement yesterday and today. Kind of substantial movement, also gray zone expansion, and this pocket is clearly visible. Zeleny High and Chervona villages were liberated during the summer counteroffensive of Ukraine in 2023, but Russians will soon reoccupy those villages. Alright, now let's go to Pokrovsk-Mirnograd direction. You may see that Ukraine still controls Mirnograd, main part of it, also including central part. Ukrainian group was evacuated mainly from Sukhy Yar and Novopavlivka. Those are the good news, and the Russian army is pretty much exhausted in attempt to close this bottleneck for Ukrainian army, encircling Ukrainian forces completely. It is not happening. I heard that some of the Russian or pro-Russian channels saying that no, it's kind of profitable for Russia to keep this bottleneck open because Russia may use some of the drones here. The idea for Russians is to encircle Ukrainian army group, to show also to their propaganda, to show to all of the world, maybe even hundreds of Ukrainian troops, and how they are imprisoned by Russians. It would be a big reputational loss for Ukraine, for Ukrainian army, for Ukrainian command, of course. So that's the main thing for Russians, and they try to do it. But Ukraine, also with the help of the aviation strikes and with the help of the drones, is stopping Russia as hard as it can. But I understand the downside of this operation, that Ukrainian military command was waiting for such a long time, and for Ukrainian forces it's almost impossible to leave this area without losses. Well, that is what happened in Pokrovsk. Our guys repelled some of the Russian attack. Russians tried to use some of the vehicles together with infantry. Some of the Russian troops went to the local buildings, tried to hide, but our drone operators chased them out there. So Russians are still unable to apply the full control over Pokrovsk. Oh, by the way, we have some of the update from Novopavlivka. Russians tried to send one more wave, and actually they infiltrated into the same village. They even crossed this small river and were finally hit over here. Well, maybe those were the remains of the initial Russian forces that infiltrated into Novopavlivka, and here's just the compilation of the Ukrainian drone operation done on that facility and against Russian vehicles. The job to get rid of the Russian occupiers in Novopavlivka continues, but it is their failed attack attempt. That is what I see from perspective of those videos. This attack is too much far away from the Russian logistics, and even the attempt to send more vehicles, no, it didn't work for Russians, of course. So here we have one more vehicle that was kaboomed, or stopped at least. Alright, as for the front lines, I hope it is understandable. For today we have that kind of the situation. Now to the other news. Belarus, with the help of China, started the production of artillery shells, or the parts for artillery shells. Russian officials have reported about it. Those shells, you know where they will be supplied, obviously to the Russian army. Russia has just obtained one more supplier of the shells together with North Korea. Alright, the day before yesterday I've told you about ATACMS strike on Voronezh, and definitely ATACMS missile was found, and I got the comments that those missiles, they were not shut down, they just kaboom in the air, releasing clusters, and those clusters, they hit everything on the ground. Something like that. Well, judging from what I see, it didn't happen like that, because after all, you see the shrapnel, it is only possible if missile is shut down. Here we may also see the other part. Clearly, those are the traces from the air defense missiles. They release those kind of the shrapnel. Here we can see one more marking of missile. So I think that those, or at least this one and this one, maybe it's one or two, I don't know, those were definitely shut down. Yeah, of course, clusters were found as well. So I wouldn't say that this attack was successful or not successful. Maybe some of the ATACMS hit the target, maybe not. We're not sure at this time. There is no confirmation that something was hit, for example, in a Russian military base Baltimore in Voronezh. Allegedly, that one was the target for Ukrainian ATACMS. Oh, Ryazan Oblast, some sort of the local power station was kaboomed. Kind of the big one, actually. What happened there? Russia. Is everything okay? Can we help somehow? I don't know. It seems like Magyar helps you every day, but it's not enough. Like, what else can we do, yeah? Alright guys, now about this so-called peace plan for Ukraine created by Dmitriev and Witkoff. We have the report from Christopher Miller, who is a journalist of the Financial Times, a reporter, sorry. So he is familiar with that plan, and according to him, Ukraine army should cut in half, give also certain weapons back to allies, so you see demilitarization of Ukraine, give up Donbass, yeah, you may call it capitulation, and Zelensky displaced, it means displaced maybe, so Zelensky should resign. Yeah, somehow I'm not even surprised that Dmitriev liked this plan a lot. Meanwhile, Axios gives us lots of the other information. For example, Ukraine will give up Donbass as exchange for some sort of the guarantees, but it's not possible with Russia. Ukraine already signed the guarantees, giving up nukes. We know that it's all bullshit. Axios also said that there was the talk between Witkoff and Umerov. Umerov is the ex-defense minister of Ukraine. Now he is the secretary of the Ukrainian Defense Commission. So there was the talk between him and Witkoff, where Umerov agreed on some of the points, but Umerov is no one. He's by the way, in this corruption scandal, so we don't know whether he even comes back to Ukraine. Axios also says that Zelensky spoke with Umerov and didn't support the plan at all. That's why the meeting between Witkoff and Zelensky was cancelled. Zelensky is not interested in Trump's plan. Here Axios says that it's Trump's plan. Financial Times says that it's just a plan of Witkoff and Dmitriev. But it is understandable that if Witkoff speaks with Russian high officials, someone told him to do so. So after all, I think that Trump knows everything and he tries to push Ukraine from multiple directions, even blackmailing Ukrainian government and Ukrainian president, pressing them personally based on details of the recent corruption scandal. I'm sure about it. Yes, Nabu did a very great job. I do support that, as many or all of the Ukrainians, let's say. But this situation in general is being used by Witkoff and Donald Trump to press Ukraine even more. Well, Ukrainian journalists also mentioned that the arrival of the high-ranked generals to Ukraine, representatives of American army, is not connected to this so-called peace plan. Well, we'll see. Maybe tomorrow we'll know more information. Also, Ukrainian channels say that Umerov didn't accept the plan, and what was mentioned by Axios is not correct, that he accepted some of the points. So now there is a lot of the information coming, but what is understandable already, that basically this peace plan is the plan for Ukraine to capitulate, because all of the maximalist points of the Russian Federation are in that plan, together with giving up territories, demilitarization, maybe later on they will put also denazification, but even the Russian language as official is out there. Also the Russian Orthodox Church, which is used just by Russian propaganda. Ukraine has its own Orthodox Church, and then Tucker Carlson says that Zelensky fights against Christianity. No, Ukraine has its own church, but Russia uses its Moscow church in Ukraine to provide its influence. Those are two big differences. Ukraine is more than 90% Christian country. We have Catholics, we have Orthodox, so it doesn't really matter. And it's just a pure Russian propaganda. Then they say that Ukraine is fighting against Christianity. It is basically nonsense. So Tucker Carlson may kiss his own ass, or Putin's ass. That's what he usually likes to do. Keith Kellogg is going to resign from his position in 2026. Well, after all, he is an elderly guy, and he was one of the most sane people around Trump, but so it's kind of sad that he's going to retire soon, yeah? I wish Witkoff would retire, but no, that bastard, he likes influence and money, it seems like. And more about this so-called peace plan. It seems like Steve Witkoff doesn't know how social media works. He commented that he must have got this from K. K, it means Kirill Dmitriev. Some sort of the private message, but with that, Steve Witkoff confirms those rumors, which are now elsewhere in internet, about so-called peace plan, which is basically nothing more than defeat and capitulation of Ukraine, which United States and Russia are planning for Ukraine. They can plan whatever they want. Ukraine will never agree on that. Especially right now, those cruise missiles, for example, today were launched on just residential buildings out there. Yeah, you can see in Ternopil. Now 26 people report to lose their life in that building. It was the aimed attack of Russia on Ukrainian city. Does Russia want to negotiate? Well, they show that they want to continue not just war, but they want to terrorize Ukrainian people in general. Eastern Ukraine, Western Ukraine, as in this case, doesn't matter. It is a pure hatred towards Ukrainians, Ukrainian culture. This is the existential war for Ukraine. Meanwhile, Wall Street Journal has kind of the interesting article published. They say that Putin sees the end of the war as the threat to his own power. Yeah, I also say about it. According to United States intelligence, It's not the rumor. This information comes from the United States intelligence. The Kremlin cannot explain to Russians the enormous losses and expenses, so it's trying to prolong the war for as long as possible. Any negotiations are risk for Putin, like real negotiations. Putin will try to negotiate. For him, in parallel with the war, with negotiations is okay scenario. That's what he says openly. We're gonna negotiate with so-called Ukrainian regime and continue the special military operation until we reach the goals of the special military operation. Economist Andreas argues that Russia is no longer trying to win. A long war benefits it. If the war ends, 2 million veterans, including convicts and mobilized prisoners promised freedom, will return home, and all of them will ask one question: what was this for? The Kremlin has no convincing answer. Historian Mark Galotti adds that Putin is trapped between fear and uncertainty, and Trump's proposed peace initiatives only increase the pressure on him. From this perspective, it could be, but he resigns all of the ceasefires and everything. Putin ignored all well-known rule: don't start a war you cannot win. The Kremlin may try to claim victory by occupying the Ukrainian region or another, but that won't be enough. At first, for those Russian soldiers, for the Russian society in general, especially then you put those unrealistic aims of SMO as demilitarization, denazification, and because Russia is unable to achieve its victory in a military way, and it is understandable that it might take years and years to continue this war, they are trying to use the diplomatic weaponry, and Witkoff is playing the great role here, together with Trump. The sole goal of the special military operation, denazification, demilitarization, and preventing Ukraine from joining NATO are simply unachievable, and Kremlin certainly knows it. The Institute for the Study of War also tells that if Ukraine gives up Donbass, Donetsk Oblast and Luhansk, it would place Ukraine in a position that is significantly less defensible than the current line. So that is what Russia wants. They want to occupy those territories, and after they'll say, okay, Ukraine violates the ceasefire, we're gonna go and attack Zaporizhia, Dnipro, Kharkiv, and they might go easily to those points. So the idea for Russia is to occupy those very important settlements, starting from Slavyansk and finishing with Konstantinivka. So yeah, those peace agreements will lead to absolutely nothing, zero. I'm 100% sure about it. All of the attempts to pressure Ukraine from any sort of the sides, those are stupid, really, really stupid. And unfortunately, the war will continue, but Ukraine has no other choice than to defend. Well, actually, yeah, there is the choice to sign those agreements and capitulate, basically, and Russia will still occupy the entire Ukraine, because that's the goal of the special military operation. That's what Putin tells in his interviews, that Ukraine doesn't exist in his head, but he applies it to real life, that all of the Ukrainian identity should be erased. That is what they're doing on occupied territories. So for sure, we're going to face the long, long war, which might last for many years. That's my prediction based on facts, if there are no any sort of the black swans, as for example, Prigozhin. Okay, my friends, thank you so much for making my content possible on this channel with your support on Patreon and also membership of the channel. Guys, the link for my Patreon is in the video description just below. The membership, you may just press button join somewhere here. If you cannot support me or not willing to support me in that way, no worries, you may just press your like to this video and subscribe for the channel. That's how you propel video in YouTube algorithms, which is very important also for my job. My friends, I wish you all a peaceful sky wherever you are, and have a great time.